Just to raise hands because I got to go to a break. So just let me take a quick poll. How many people here believe that there is a growing threat that you may not be able to preach all the things in the gospel because it would be politically incorrect? Hands?
Anyway. Sure. Oh, yeah, sure.
Only Professor George says no. Back in just a second. We're back with a panel of religious leaders who are quite well known and lead an awful lot of people all around the country. And Professor Robert George, who I can't believe I like the man. He holds the Woodrow Wilson Chair at Princeton University. But he was the first guy who I said, I think Woodrow Wilson was an evil SOB. And he said, I'm saying nothing. We were saying, right before the break, I asked a question, and you were the only one that answered differently. I said, is anybody worried about the right to preach the Bible or preach and having that right taken away, speaking your mind in church?
There are places around the world where you have to worry about censorship, government censorship, and not just places like China. There are liberal democracies like Canada and Sweden where preachers have felt the sting of the government whip for things they've said when they've violated the norms of liberal political correctness. But the United States, in my view, is not one of them. I'm not worried about government censorship. I'm worried about a more insidious form of censorship. I call it self-censorship, where we, whether we're Christians or Jews or other believers or just people who want to speak out, who have it in their hearts to speak out, who will hold back and censor themselves because they're afraid of being unpopular or afraid of saying something that will cause other people to look down on them, or they're afraid of elite opinion. There's a kind of intimidation there. You see it when people will hold back from speaking out in defense of human life in the womb or the elderly, when people will hold themselves back from speaking out in defense of marriage as the union of man and woman. That's self-censorship.
That's because I think most people have gotten into that trap because you don't want to offend. I don't want to offend anybody. I mean, look at what I do for a living, though. You don't want to offend anybody. You don't want to cause any problem, but that's different than having the courage to stand up. We live in a country where Jeremiah Wright says things I've never heard before, and he's fine. Why do you have a problem, or why do you fear that?
I like what Peter Marshall said. He was a Senate chaplain years ago. He said if a man's not willing to stand for something, then he's liable to fall for anything. And we have a whole lot of churches. We're guilty of being parts of numerous churches in a general sense who have kind of hushed their mouth. And to your point, Professor Robert, we've kind of neutered ourselves and we've diluted the message. I really think what Ralph said earlier is the key to it. For churches to begin to have that fire like the early founding fathers had, we've got to go back to the book. We've got to go back to God's Word.
I want to say something, Glenn, again, as a
Glenn,
Catholic.
may I intervene, Glenn, on this side?
Hold on just a sec. Hold on just a second. Okay. Stephen, we'll come to you in a second. Go ahead, finish up. Pastor.
A lot of churches that are pro-marriage silence themselves on the marriage issue in California and Maine and other places where the question was put to the people of whether we want to redefine marriage or we want to retain marriage as the union of husband and wife. But one church that did speak out, and I want to pay tribute to them, is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church, which spoke out in California. There were many Mormons who contributed money and who worked on the phones and who went door to door. They weren't afraid to speak out, and they were vilified for it, and they were attacked for it. And there's a major effort of intimidation against this minority community. But they stood up.
I personally have met people who were run off the road, moms who were frightened for their life in California, and not just of that faith, but of others as well.
We kept track in California. I was involved in the Prop 8 battle of the churches that were intimidated, the number of pastors who had to have security, church buildings had to be protected, bricks thrown through windows, bricks thrown through cars, all this kind of thing took place. But I think in contrast to all this also, there was a rising up. There were evangelicals, there were Catholics, there were people of the LDS Church that rose up and said enough is enough. There is a rising up of pastors. We're not going to speak merely on abortion, though we should continue. We're not going to merely defend marriage, though we understand the implications. We're going to speak out on the more immorality of the aspects of our economy, debt, for example, the excessive debt, the excessive taxation. There's a host of moral, biblical issues, and there's a rising up group of pastors, and we will not be silenced any longer.
Stephen, real quick, I've got to take a break, but go ahead and let's shoehorn your comment in here.
I just want to beg to differ with my colleagues there. I think the failure of pastors to take the lead in this issue, on these issues, is the reason why we're seeing the kind of problems or melees that we're seeing in our culture today. In addition to that, I want to introduce my friend to the idea of hate crime legislation, introduce them to the idea of a 501c3 that is used to knock Christians around and keep them silent from speaking out in America today. I want to introduce them to the idea of ENDA, which is employment non-discrimination, which is bullying and pushing Christians into hiring people that they should not hire. We are, in America, are experiencing a soft tyranny, and we need to resist it. We need to recognize what it is, call it what it is. The Bible says that the Christians, that the gatekeepers, that the shepherds have failed. And our shepherds in America have strengthened the hands of the evildoers because they have been silent for too long.
All right, I have to take a break. Be back in just a second. Back with our panel of religious leaders, and we're trying to look at the news of the day and try to look at it from a different perspective. John Hagee is here, and you were kind of the guy that really has spoken about Iran and Israel an awful lot. 48% of Americans now think that Jesus will come back in the next 40 years. And I know that's not new. A lot of people have thought that for, since the beginning of time. But a lot of the pieces here that have never been here for the prophecy are here now.
That's exactly right. Israel became a reality in 1948 in keeping with all the prophets of the Old Testament. And now we have a nation that was given a Bible mandate 3,500 years ago to own a specific geographic piece of property. If I could talk to the President of the United States, I would like to ask him to stop using the power of his office to divide the city of Jerusalem and to stop putting pressure on the nation of Israel for a no-growth policy in Judea and Samaria. And when the Prime Minister of Israel comes to America, to treat him with dignity and respect and to treat him like a friend and not an enemy, not to walk off.
Anybody disagree that, the Bible tells us clearly, you stand against Israel, you will lose your land as well.
Right. Well, and Glenn, when he went to Cairo and compared what he called the occupation of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza to the Holocaust, that was one of the most shameful moments in the modern history of America.
Well, Glenn, in the Revolutionary War days, we had the Black Robe Regiment, ministers standing up from the pulpit, and the cries we heard in the streets of America were first heard in the pulpits of America. Right. And the people were educated from the biblical principles of what life and liberty is all about.
What was the thundering voice? Who said? Sam Adams.
John Adams called it the pulpit thundered was his description of it. And it was a black regiment, black robed regiment. Wow.
And we've got to recapture that in America. And I believe that voice is, and when that voice comes up, it also will support the principles of Israel and our relationship. It will talk about the economy. It will talk about our debt. The Bible gives us the formula, and our early founding fathers built this Constitution of this great nation upon those principles.
Right. And it doesn't mean, because I'd walk out of a church that was telling me, vote for a Republican or vote for a Democrat.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's not about that.
It's about the principles.
It's about principles. And
which are accessible to reason by all men. Right.
That's right.
You started a project, what is it, the Manhattan?
The Manhattan Declaration.
Right.
We've spoken today, Glenn, about the need for people to speak out. People of all faiths, certainly all Christians, to speak out. Here's an opportunity to do it. If your viewers have a pencil and a piece of paper, write down www.manhattandeclaration.org. Manhattandeclaration.org. This is an opportunity to join religious leaders, many of whom are here today, in pledging fidelity to three great foundational principles of our civilization and our polity: the sanctity of human life in all stages and conditions, the dignity of marriage as the conjugal union of husband and wife, and religious freedom and the rights of conscience. Everything else is built on those core principles. So there are lots of other important issues. Those are foundational. Everything else depends on respecting them, and we've gone too far from them. And we pledge in the Manhattan Declaration, Catholics, Evangelical Protestants, Eastern Orthodox Christians, all united together despite our theological differences on these moral and political principles of our civilization.
When you sign it, what happens then?
Well, you sign it and you're speaking out. Now you become part of the solution and no longer part of the problem. You're pledging that nothing will prevent you from speaking out and standing up in support of these core principles, and you're pledging to render ungrudgingly to Caesar what is Caesar's, but to never give to Caesar what is God's.
Okay, I got to go. I got to take a break. We'll be back. We want to leave you tonight with this thought.
Glenn, I want to challenge our pastors and fellow pastors. If our forefathers could give their lives and their sacred honor, we can give our lives and the honor that God has given us with preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ to change this world. We can do it. Amen. We just need to do it.
Amen. Black Robe Regiment. Right. There it is. Pastor Broden from Texas, and all of you great gentlemen, thank you very much. From New York, good night, America.